Linen lunged forward, eyes widening in sheer horror. That wasn't just any necklace, it was a commemorative ruby piece from Paris Fashion Week, symbolizing eternal devotion. It wasn't just worth tens of millions, it was priceless, one of a kind. Mr. Lu had dropped a billion-yuan deal just to personally acquire it for her. And she'd tossed it like it was nothing. It all began that night, backstage at an award ceremony. Shunman, her best friend, handed her a bouquet with a triumphant grin. "Congratulations, my dear. Empire City's top model, you've earned it." Tonight's photos are downright legendary. As expected, the win landed her at the top of trending searches. Xisha placed the trophy and flowers on the table, brushing off the hype with a casual smile. "I'm sure the insults outnumber the compliments, but I've gotten used to it." Noticing her slipping off the luxury jewelry she'd borrowed from their brand sponsor, Shunman looked puzzled. "Aren't you heading to the after-party?" A faint blush crept across Xisha's face. "No. I'm not going." Shunman, sounding like a wronged lover, asking wistfully, "Was it Lu Ginin?" At the mere mention of that stingy, aging playboy, she could launch into a tirade that'd last 3 days and nights. Just last month, he'd been rumored to be dating a rookie singer. This month, paparazzi had caught him cozying up to a trending young actress. The man practically monopolized the gossip columns year-round. "For 3 years, you've been stuck in a secret relationship, and he wouldn't even give you a title," Shunman scoffed. "You're the only one who treats him like some prized jewel, chasing after him like a puppy. Do you even know people are mocking you behind your back, calling you a doormat? You're not under some kind of spell cast by a sly fox, are you? Seriously, what's so great about that old man?" Xisha forced a laugh, growing more self-conscious with every word her best friend said. She tried to muster a weak defense, mumbling, "He was good to me, once. Back when I was cornered by a bunch of thugs, he showed up and helped me out. Ever since then, she trailed off, shaking her head at herself, at her own foolish heart. Letting her long, wavy hair fall freely, she grabbed her bag and turned toward the door. Shunman huffed, puffing her cheeks in frustration. "If you're ditching me for your boyfriend, I'm cutting you off right now." Xisha, well accustomed to her dramatics, shot her a playful glance. "If we cut ties tonight, can we meet again as strangers tomorrow?" The air in the lavish lakeside villa was heavy with warmth, but it wasn't the kind of warmth that soothed, it smoldered. The moment Lu Ginin stepped through the door, his lips found Xisha's, stealing her breath and the space between them in a heady collision. They moved together in an intoxicating rhythm until her soft protests broke the spell. "I made you a special dinner," she murmured, her voice tinged with playful reproach. "How could you rush straight to the dessert?" Lu Ginin's brows knit together, his lips curling into a displeased frown. "Who said you could go into the kitchen?" His sharp gaze flicked over her. "You reek of oil and smoke. Go clean up." The excitement brimming in Xisha's chest deflated in an instant, like a balloon pricked by a needle. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in her bright, almond-shaped eyes, disappointment, vulnerability, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. A practiced, dazzling smile replaced it as she coiled her arms around his neck. Her breath tickled his ear as she teased, "So picky, huh? Why don't you help me wash up, then?" Something in her whispered invitation ignited him. Heat flared in his chest as he scooped her up effortlessly, carrying her toward the upstairs bathroom. For Lu Ginin, self-control was a virtue he reserved for the boardroom. In the confines of their intimacy, he took without restraint, leaving her to cry for mercy in a battle she had unwittingly begun. Afterward, she lay draped lazily across his chest, her voice soft and melodic. "You love collecting art, don't you? There's a charity auction coming up, classic paintings, calligraphy. We could go together?" The once fiery man now seemed carved from ice, his attention consumed by the glow of his phone screen. Without sparing her a glance, he replied, "I don't have time." Her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, her knuckles whitening. He always said he didn't have time. Deep down, she wondered if it wasn't time he lacked, but the desire to be seen with her. Unwilling to let the silence settle, Xisha fished for conversation, her tone light yet hopeful. A sponsor at today's fashion show gifted me a ruby bracelet. It's as stunning as the necklace you gave me before. Should I try it on for you? Lu Ginin barely looked up, his reply colder than the room's temperature. No need. The spark in her expression dimmed, replaced by the familiar sting of disappointment. Of course, he had no interest in the little details of her life. Still, she pressed on, her voice casual but laced with an undercurrent of longing. DH Jewelry's new season collection is gorgeous. Have you seen it? His impatience finally broke through. If you're thinking about the endorsement deal, forget it. You're not getting it. Xisha knew she'd only brought it up casually. After all, the endorsement was already destined for his rumored girlfriend, Yi Shanshan. Still, his brusqueness sliced deeper than she expected. Setting his phone down with a flicker of annoyance, he said, "We're in a relationship, Xisha. Stop dragging work into it." Her silence was heavy, the kind that pulls at the edges of your resolve until it snaps. After a beat, she slid from his embrace, her body trembling with exhaustion but her gaze clear and resolute. She turned to him with a seriousness he hadn't seen before, her voice steady. "Let's break up." Lu Ginin's eyes narrowed, disbelief flashing across his face. "What did you just say?" She met his gaze without flinching, her tone unwavering. He wanted her to rephrase, to retreat, to bend as she always had, but instead, she repeated it with quiet finality. "I said, let's break up. I don't love you anymore." Shunman's confusion was palpable as she pressed her best friend for answers. "Xisha, what's gotten into you? Why the sudden decision to terminate your contract? You practically moved mountains to get into Starlight Entertainment under Lu Corp." Gone was Xisha's usual soft, deferential demeanor. She dropped her news like a depth charge. "I broke up with Lu Ginin." Stunned silence. Then Shunman practically exploded with joy, though laced with incredulity. "Finally! The revolution we've been waiting for. Tell me this isn't just a tantrum. You're not planning to crawl back to him after a few days of separation, are you?" Xisha's eyes were steady, her voice calm but firm. "Do I look like I'm joking? I've been the fool chasing after him for 3 years. That's enough." She'd been mocked as love-addled long enough, it was high time to reclaim her focus. Joining Lu Ginin's company as a model had been a calculated move to get closer to him. Now that they'd split, there was no point sticking around. Every second spent in this place was a second wasted. She pushed open the door to the office, only to be met with her manager's usual forceful attitude. "Where were you last night? I called you a dozen times. There's a jewelry show in 3 days, you're going whether you like it or not." For the first time, Xisha defied her manager, brushing aside the demand. "I'm here to terminate my contract." Her manager's domineering attitude didn't waver, a sneer curling her lips. "You think waiving the threat of contract termination will scare me? Do you even know how much it'll cost to break it? Obey me, or I'll ruin you. Just as I lifted you up, I can ensure you'll crash down so hard you'll never work in this industry again." Before Xisha could respond, Shunman let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Are you seriously taking credit for her success? What a joke!" Xisha fought her way up from campus modeling to where she is now. "You've just been leeching off her achievements. Don't worry, Xisha. I'll cover the penalty fees." The manager's face twisted with fury, her teeth clenched tight. "Well, aren't you the picture of generosity, mission?" she spat, her gaze snapping back to Xisha. "But don't think you can climb back up if you leave. With your pathetic background, good luck landing anywhere near Lu Ginin again." Xisha met the venom with unwavering calm, stepping closer with each word. "I don't care. You clearly haven't heard, I've already left him. As for the jewelry show, I'm not doing it. Or did you think I was oblivious to how many deals you forced on me by leaning on Lu Ginin's name?" Her voice sharpened, cutting like a knife. "I don't want trouble, but I'm not some pushover." Send me the breakdown of the breach penalties within 3 days. I'll pay what's fair, but only what's fair. If the company tries to make this difficult, we'll settle it in court. I doubt Starlight wants the headlines about how it bullies its artists. The room bristled with tension, but Xisha's resolve was a storm no one could stop. As the sisters exited the office, a rush of cathartic joy spilled between them, laughter bursting in shared triumph. Now that's the Xisha I know, Shenman teased, her grin wickedly approving. The girl who could silence a room at the university hospital just by walking in. For 3 years, you bent over backward for that sorry excuse of a man. I was starting to wonder if he'd put a spell on you or something. Just as they were brainstorming celebratory plans, a familiar voice cut through their chatter. Xisha turned, mildly surprised, only to find Linen, Lu Ginin's ever-loyal errand boy, standing there with an unusually polite expression. I happened to finish some business nearby and was just heading back to headquarters. Shall I give you a ride to see Mr. Lu? He offered with a pleasant smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Xisha blinked, taken aback for a moment, before the disbelief settled in. Was he serious? This man, who usually played the part of Lu Ginin's shadow, never sparing her even the courtesy of a nod, was now suddenly helpful. Her laugh came out soft but razor-edged. No need. I won't be joining you. But, she added, pulling a delicate chain from her bag, there is something you can take back for me. Linen froze as Xisha dangled the necklace, a gift from Lu Ginin himself, now a symbol of a chapter firmly closed. I forgot to return this when I left. Be a dear and make sure he gets it, won't you? For a moment, Linen hesitated, his usually smooth demeanor faltering. With a strained smile, he murmured, "Ah, that explains it. The boss has been in an unusually foul mood lately. So it's true, our little firecracker here is officially breaking things off." Xisha's only response was an easy, irreverent shrug, the kind that made it clear she was done bending for anyone's storms but her own. Linen had originally thought bringing Xisha back might lighten Mr. Lu's mood, but instead, he'd landed himself in hot water. Quietly taking a step back, he tried to mask his panic. This kind of valuable item should really be returned by you personally. Xisha's laugh was soft, almost indulgent. Without missing a beat, she turned, walked straight to the nearest trash can, and dropped the necklace inside like it was a used tissue. Then I'll toss it. I'm sure Mr. Lu won't mind, she said lightly, already preparing to leave. Linen lunged forward, eyes widening in sheer horror. That wasn't just any necklace, it was a commemorative ruby piece from Paris Fashion Week, symbolizing eternal devotion. It wasn't just worth tens of millions, it was priceless, one of a kind. Mr. Lu had dropped a billion-yuan deal just to personally acquire it for her. And she'd tossed it like it was nothing. This wasn't just throwing away a necklace, this was tossing out Mr. Lu's heart, still beating and all. But Xisha simply walked away, poised and unbothered. Oh, and one more thing, she said over her shoulder, if it's not too much trouble, could you remind the company to hurry up with my contract termination? A little efficiency would be appreciated. Linen stared after her, utterly dumbfounded. She was serious this time, no more empty threats. This wasn't just a breakup, this was a full-scale departure. Behind her, Shenman threw a smug grin at Linen before hooking her arm through Xisha's. Come on, sister. My brother's bar is waiting. Time to celebrate your escape from misery and toast to singlehood. Half an hour later, in his office, Lu Ginin sat at his desk, the ruby necklace lying before him, his entire demeanor cloaked in storm clouds. He stared at it for a long moment, eyes dark and unreadable. Did she say why she wants to terminate her contract? He finally asked, voice low and tightly controlled. Linen wiped the sweat beading on his forehead. Miss Ron only mentioned the contract termination in passing when she handed me the necklace. She hopes it can be expedited, but didn't provide a reason. He shuddered at the thought of admitting the necklace had been fished out of a trash can. That little tidbit would remain sealed in his mind until the grave, any slip-up, and he'd likely meet an untimely end at Mr. Lu's hands. Lu Ginin's grip tightened around the necklace, his knuckles whitening. Find out where she is. Now. I want to see her immediately. By the time the city lights twinkled in the growing dusk, the bar was alive with revelry. At its heart, Xisha's best friend, Shunman, commandeered a microphone, her voice cutting through the chatter. Ladies and gentlemen, to celebrate my girl's glorious return to freedom, tonight's drinks are on me. Cheers and whistles erupted as the room reached a fever pitch. Xisha groaned, pressing her hands over her face as she perched at the bar. Between clenched teeth, she hissed, "Shunman, I'm a public figure. Do you want to ruin me? Turn me into an orphan? Tone it down before someone recognizes me." Shunman tossed back the last of her drink with a flourish, slamming the glass onto the bar before clapping Xisha on the shoulder. "Relax. This place belongs to my brother, and trust me, he's your #1 fan. As long as you're under his roof, not a single whisper of gossip about you is getting out." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "So, now that you've ditched that dog of a man, and cut ties with his company, what's next? Don't tell me you're giving up the career you worked your butt off for." Xisha's gaze lowered, her fingers idly tracing the rim of her glass. "I've had an idea brewing for a while," she admitted, "but it's going to take a lot more money to pull off. For now, I'll stick to modeling. I've got my grad school thesis defense coming up soon anyway. After spending years chasing Lu Ginin around, my academics have taken a backseat. I need to get back on track." "You'll crush it," Shunman said, her tone brimming with certainty. "You've always been the smart one, getting into grad school years ahead of everyone else your age. Picking it back up? That'll be a walk in the park for you." Without waiting for a reply, Shunman grabbed Xisha's hand, abandoning her glass as she tugged her toward the pulsing heart of the dance floor. "But academics can wait, tonight's about reclaiming your joy. You haven't set foot in a bar in 3 years because of that man. Not tonight. We're going all out, and since your privacy's locked down, there's nothing holding you back." Xisha hesitated for only a second before the music tugged at her steps. A slow grin spread across her face as she followed Shunman into the crowd. Tonight, she'd let go, if only for a little while. Lu Ginin stepped out of the private room and was greeted with a sight that made his jaw tighten instinctively. The woman who used to be all doe-eyed innocence in front of him was now a vision he barely recognized. Long, cascading waves framed her shoulders, and her little black slip dress hugged her frame with a dangerous elegance. She swayed like a serpent, her lithe waist hypnotic under the pulsing lights. Her legs, endless, impossibly long, drew every pair of eyes in the room. With her flushed cheeks and sultry smile, she was devastating, like a forbidden siren commanding the room. Every man within a 10-foot radius seemed unable to tear his gaze away. That was enough to send an icy edge to Lu Ginin's otherwise inscrutable expression. His dark eyes flickered with a storm of emotion, yet Xisha remained blissfully unaware, lost in the rhythm of the music, her movements carefree for the first time in ages. And then, like a thunderclap, it happened. She stumbled lightly into a firm chest. A strong arm coiled around her delicate waist, holding her in place. Xisha's body stiffened instantly, her instincts firing as she raised an elbow to fend off the stranger. But before she could follow through, the grip around her tightened, drawing her effortlessly into the stranger's hold. Above her, a cold, sharp voice sliced through the din. "Having fun, are we, Xisha?" That voice, it struck a chord so deep within her it sent her heart skittering. Familiar, infuriatingly so. She froze, her mind scrambling. Lu Ginin? What the hell is he doing here? The shock wore off quickly, replaced by a defiant flash in her eyes. They'd broken up. She didn't owe him a damn thing. But just as she opened her mouth to retort, she felt herself being hoisted up, slung over his shoulder like a sack of flour. "What the? Put me down," she demanded, her fists pounding weakly against his back, the blood rushing to her face. The indignity of it all was overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the knot of emotions rising in her chest. Rage. Humiliation. And somewhere, buried beneath it all, the undeniable pang of old, unwanted familiarity. She pounded furiously on his solid back, each strike as ineffective as a summer drizzle against a fortress wall. Put me down right now, you. Her words were abruptly cut off as his hand landed sharply on her rear, the sting enough to make her gasp in indignation. If you don't want to make a scene, I suggest you keep quiet, he warned, his voice low and commanding, the kind that could silence a room. Without waiting for a response, he marched towards the exit, carrying her as though she were nothing more than a wayward parcel. Meanwhile, Shunman returned from the restroom just in time to witness the spectacle. Her jaw dropped. Who in the world was staging a CEO dramatics romance scene in the middle of the bar? She squinted, and her disbelief turned into a sharp intake of breath. The girl squirming ineffectively on that man's shoulder was none other than her Xisha. But Shunman, knowing full well her own petite frame wouldn't stand a chance against the human glacier that was Lu Ginin, hesitated. Frustrated, she could only glare and fume silently as the pair disappeared through the doors. Of all the days to be outplayed, she muttered, sulking as she stomped away. Xisha's night, however, went from mortifying to infuriating in record time. Back at his villa, she found herself unceremoniously dumped onto the plush bed, the soft surface doing little to cushion the dizzying tumble. Pushing herself upright, her hair a wild halo of fury, she unleashed, "Are you out of your mind?" Lu Ginin loomed over her, his tall frame casting a shadow that felt both oppressive and infuriatingly magnetic. His fingers, long and elegant, tipped her chin upward, forcing her to meet his stormy gaze. "Did you forget what I told you?" he asked, his voice as cold as it was furious. "Who gave you permission to go to a bar? Did you see the way those men were looking at you, all like wolves ready to devour their prey? Or was that what you wanted? Do I not satisfy you, Xisha? Are you that desperate to seek attention from other men?" Xisha's cheeks flushed crimson, her indignation mixing with a flash of vulnerability as unshed tears glimmered in her eyes. Just as she opened her mouth to fire back, Lu Ginin stepped forward, his hand curling firmly around the delicate curve of her neck. Before she could react, his lips descended with a force that was both commanding and suffocating, stealing her breath and silencing her protest. Her fists pounded weakly against his chest, her resistance growing more frantic as his grip seemed to tighten, as if he intended to draw her into his very soul. And just when her frustration boiled over, Xisha found her opening. Summoning every ounce of strength, she swung her hand, delivering a resounding slap across his face. "We're over," she spat, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "What right do you have to judge me? What are you to me anymore?" For a moment, Lu Ginin froze, the sting of her slap etched onto his face more than his skin. He stared at her, stunned into silence, his usual composed mask shattered. This wasn't the docile, affectionate kitten he thought he knew. This was a woman with claws. Slowly, his hand rose, brushing against her lips, his touch uncharacteristically gentle. "Be good," he murmured, his voice like a velvet trap, dark and coaxing. "Don't bring up breaking up again. Push too far, Xisha, and you might not like what happens next." Xisha slapped his hand away, her expression hardening into something edged with scorn. "You think this is some game of cat and mouse?" she retorted, her voice dripping with disdain. 3 years of hiding, of being treated like a dirty secret. Do you have any idea how much I debase myself for you, how small I had to make myself? And you have the audacity to think I'm playing coy by leaving you?" Lu Ginin said nothing, his dark eyes unwavering as they bore into hers. They gleamed with something she couldn't quite decipher, an inscrutable mix of frustration, desire, and something deeper, something terrifying in its intensity. Xisha's frustration boiled over, her chest heaving as she shoved him away with all the force she could muster. "I'm serious this time. This isn't me throwing a tantrum," she spat, her voice trembling yet resolute. "We agreed from the start, neither of us could end this whenever we wanted." Lu Ginin's voice was maddeningly calm, dismissive even. "Sure, but if this is ending, it's on for my terms. When I'm done. Not before. Whatever excuse you've conjured up, it doesn't change a thing, I don't agree." A spark of defiance lit in Xisha's eyes as she tilted her head, her lips curving into a sardonic smile. "What's this, Lu Ginin? Don't tell me you've fallen for me," she challenged, her tone laced with mockery. His laughter was low and sharp, slicing through the room like a blade. "You think that's even remotely possible?" he shot back, disdain dripping from every word. Her smile faltered, a flicker of sadness flashing across her face before she smoothed it into something bitter. "Of course not," she muttered, almost to herself, a quiet resignation lining her words. Lu Ginin yanked at his tie, his irritation apparent as he turned on his heel toward his study. "Pack my things. I'm traveling tomorrow," he ordered, his tone curt, as if she were little more than a shadow in his life. That was the final straw. Fury bubbled up inside Xisha, her voice rising in indignation. "Pack? Are you kidding me? What am I, your personal servant? You've got hands, don't you?" Her anger fueled her next move. "Whether you agree or not, this is over. My best friend was right, peace starts with ditching toxic men." Without a second thought, she stormed toward the door, determination driving every step. But just as her fingers brushed the handle, two towering bodyguards materialized, blocking her escape. She glared at them, her fiery resolve undeterred. "Seriously? Is he that insecure he needs human barricades?" she growled, her voice dripping with scorn. Behind her, deliberate footsteps echoed from the staircase. She turned to see Lu Ginin descending slowly, his gaze locked on her with chilling calm. From his vantage point, he looked down at her as though surveying a defiant animal he intended to tame. "Without my permission, you're not stepping out of here," Lu Ginin said, his tone maddeningly indifferent. "Quit making a fuss, and just go back to bed." Xisha bristled instantly, her fury erupting like a struck match. "This is illegal confinement. I'll report you to the authorities," she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. He regarded her outburst with infuriating calm, a smirk curling his lips. "Go ahead. Want me to make the call for you?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. Left with no other choice, Xisha stormed back to the guest room, her rage boiling over. Locking the door firmly behind her, she eyed it warily, half expecting the beast of a man to try and barge in during the night. Her fingers hovered over her phone, debating whether to call the police. But the thought of his cocky challenge, "Go ahead," stopped her cold. If he was this brazen, he likely had countermeasures ready. Reporting him might be pointless. Just as despair began to creep in, her phone lit up with a call from her best friend, Shunman. The voice on the other end was both cautious and tinged with guilt. "Babe, tell me that jerk didn't, devour you completely." Xisha collapsed onto the bed with an exasperated groan. "Relax, your dad here is still alive, though I'm practically under house arrest. It's infuriating, I can see what I want, but I can't touch it. It's driving me insane." Shunman gasped in scandalized delight, the sparkle of gossip practically audible through the phone. "This guy really thinks he's the male lead in some trashy CEO comic, doesn't he? Kidnapping, too. Wow, what a masterpiece." Xisha pulled the blanket over her head with a huff. "Don't worry, I can hold my ground. For now, I'm going to sleep. Tomorrow, I'll figure out how to get out of this hellhole." Shunman, ever the loyal friend, declared boldly, "Call me if you need reinforcements. I'll be there in a heartbeat." After hanging up, Xisha mulled over the trouble she'd stirred up and decided it was better not to drag her best friend into this mess. She needed all her energy for the battles tomorrow promised. Love had turned him into her treasure once, but now that love was gone, he was nothing more than an annoying weed. Sleep eluded her, so Xisha wandered out of her room. Passing the study, she noticed the light spilling out and the door ajar. Lu Ginin, ever the workaholic, probably couldn't sleep either. An idea sparked, maybe she could plant some sleep-inducing herbs for him? She glanced at the lavender-potted plant in her hand, considering where to place it. Her eye scanned the room, landing on the desk by the computer. Perfect. As she leaned in to set the pot down, her elbow grazed a rolled-up scroll perched on the desk's edge. The scroll wobbled precariously before tumbling to the floor with a soft thud. Panicked, Xisha scrambled to catch it, but her fingers missed by a hair. Her heart froze as a roar thundered from behind her, venomous and furious. "Who gave you permission to touch my things?" Xisha jolted awake, her chest heaving, and wiped the cold sweat off her forehead. A dream. Just a dream. She sat up, gripping her blankets tightly. Her mind replayed that absurd memory of him giving her the silent treatment for days over a single painting. Oh, how she should have yelled back in that dream, maybe even slapped him twice for good measure. Rubbing her temples, she smirked as a fresh idea bloomed. She grabbed her phone and, with a determined stride, headed out of the room. Since he treated those paintings like treasures, why not burn them all and see if that'll earn her freedom? Once the thought landed, Xisha wasted no time. She dashed into the study, grabbed every single one of Lu Ginshin's priceless, multi-billion yuan paintings, and hauled them straight to the kitchen stove. That self-righteous man hated the smell of oil and smoke, didn't he? Wasn't he always pretending to be some untouchable, ethereal god? With a mischievous grin, she snapped a family portrait of the soon-to-be charred masterpieces, opened his chat window, and hit send. Just as she was about to type, hostages secured. Freedom in exchange, her glee was cut short by a glaring red exclamation point on her screen. Message sent, but blocked. Her smile froze mid-smirk, her rage boiling over. Oh, so this was his game? Blocking her every time he got mad? Two could play at that. She mentally slammed him into a digital timeout corner. Stewing as she glanced at the stack of irksome paintings, this wasn't just about vengeance anymore, she needed to escape, and fast. An idea sparked. Minutes later, the kitchen billowed with thick, black smoke, the shrieking of fire alarms echoing through the villa. Fire! Someone, help! Xisha called, clutching her nose as she dramatically leaned against the doorframe. She silently counted to 3 before the sound of footsteps thundered down the hall. Lu Ginshin's ever-vigilant bodyguards burst into the room, armed with fire extinguishers. But before they could yell instructions, one by one, they collapsed, unconscious, without so much as a cry for help. Xisha surveyed the chaos, a triumphant smirk tugging at her lips. Her little plan had worked perfectly. Xisha couldn't help but let out a giggle, her mood light as a breeze. The whole operation had gone off without a hitch. Right now, she felt less like a model with a knack for drama and more like some high-achieving med school dropout with a mischievous streak, think Nio Huolu Xisha, Empress of Escapades. Sure, the makeshift incense she'd whipped up in a rush wasn't exactly a masterpiece, but it had done its job. Those poor bodyguards were going to be snoozing their way through the next 24 hours. Meanwhile, over in his sleek office, Lu Ginin was dividing his attention between reviewing documents and casting fleeting glances at his phone. For once, that heartless woman seemed uncharacteristically quiet. No calls, no barrage of texts, no annoying pop-ups with her latest demands. Suspiciously peaceful. His assistant, Linen, burst through the door like a hurricane, looking as if he'd sprinted through a sauna. Lu Ginin raised an eyebrow, his expression one of mild disinterest. What now? With trembling hands, Linen slid a phone across the desk. Xisha has left the villa. On the screen was a gallery of photos featuring bodyguards sprawled out like they'd attended the worst nap party in history. As for the little troublemaker? She was long gone, probably off somewhere reveling in her newfound freedom. Lu Ginshin's brows knitted together in irritation, though the fire simmering beneath the surface remained tightly controlled. He picked up his phone and dialed a number, his voice as calm as a blade's edge. Push all my appointments to tomorrow. Book me a flight for tomorrow night. And get in touch with Starlight Entertainment, I don't care what it takes, but make sure Xisha doesn't break her contract. Because in every melodramatic chase the runaway wife saga, there's always that loyal male lead, a knight in shining armor ready to sweep in at the 11th hour. Too bad for Xisha, Lu Ginin didn't believe in playing anyone's knight. He'd prefer the role of the dragon guarding the tower. Thanks to the benevolence of the big boss, the agency that had been pulling out all the stops to block Xisha from terminating her contract finally caved. Her arrogant manager laid it out plainly, the company would agree to her demands, but only if she fulfilled one condition. The condition? Attending the jewelry show she'd skipped out on earlier. The event's organizers were hosting a celebration dinner that night at the Misty Rain Jiangnan Hotel, and the head honcho had specifically requested her presence. They'd even dangled the bait, show up, and they'd waive any claims for the losses caused by her breach of contract. Xisha let out a cold laugh. This reeked of a trap, plain and simple. A banquet dressed up as a favor, all orchestrated by that manipulative Lu Ginin to keep her tangled in his web. Did he really think this would stop her? That she'd just give up on getting free? Not a chance. If anything, the thought made her march through the hotel doors with even more fire in her step. By the time she reached the suite, a cacophony of flattering voices spilled out into the corridor. Apparently, the show's success was all thanks to Shan Shan, who had swooped in as the dazzling finale. That beloved jewelry set? Practically made for her. And, of course, Xisha skipping the event was just further proof of her incompetence. Pushing through the door, Xisha caught sight of Yi Shanshan, perched like a queen on the center sofa, surrounded by admirers. With a coy smile and an air of practiced humility, she chirped, "Oh, you flatter me." It was an honor to walk alongside so many talented professionals. The moment Xisha stepped into the room, all eyes turned toward her, though not all were kind. Yi Shanshan's gaze was the sharpest of them all, dripping with jealousy as it roved over Xisha's stunning face and impossibly long legs. The woman's scorn practically radiated as she spoke, her tone an artful blend of venom and mockery. "Ah, Miss Ruan, you've arrived at last. No wonder you're hailed as the top model in the capital, making everyone wait like this. Truly impressive." Xisha blinked, taking a split second to process before realizing she'd been ambushed before she could even sit down. Keeping her cool, she replied with measured ease, "I was told the event started at 7. But if this is Miss Yi's way of congratulating me, I'll gladly accept it. And, of course, I wish you success in the acting world, so you won't have to hop from circle to circle, stirring up trouble." Shanshan's face flushed, her smug composure cracking as she shot to her feet. The tension between them grew taut, the room practically buzzing as the two women squared off, ready to tear into each other. Before things could escalate, the event organizer cut in, his lecherous eyes fixed on Xisha. "Miss Ruan," he drawled, "breaking your contract without cause, don't you think you owe me an explanation?" A server approached with a glass of red wine, the moment charged with expectation. Xisha's mind raced. Declining outright would only make her look defiant, as if she was trying to wriggle out of the situation. It wasn't like drinking the wine would kill her. Resolving to navigate this minefield one step at a time, she picked up the glass, offering a polite, practiced smile. "This was a miscommunication on our company's end," she said smoothly, lifting the wine. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience caused. Allow me to make amends with this." She tipped the glass to her lips, her poise unwavering as the room watched her every move. Xisha drained the glass in one smooth motion, tilting her head just slightly, as if the bitter aftertaste of the wine didn't faze her in the slightest. Her unflappable grace only deepened Shanshan's spite, the woman's smirk curling with malicious satisfaction. After tonight, Shanshan thought she'd like to see how this little vixen planned to keep tempting Lu Ginin. The organizer's oily grin widened, his tone slick with mock magnanimity. "Miss Ruan, how forthright of you. I won't make this any harder, consider the matter resolved." Moments later, Xisha stepped out of the private room, her steps unsteady. The hallway wavered, her vision swimming. She gripped the wall for support, shaking her head in a futile attempt to clear the fog descending over her thoughts. Something was wrong. That wine had been tampered with. She felt it in her bones. A clammy hand slid around her waist without warning, pulling her back into a suffocating embrace. "Miss Ruan," the organizer's voice oozed behind her, sickly sweet, "are you all right? Do you need some help?" Xisha turned, her dazed eyes meeting his greasy leer. Her stomach churned as he reached for her wrist, but she twisted free, desperate to put distance between herself and his cloying presence. She needed to get out. Now. The man's fingers tightened around her wrist, his tone sharp and loaded with insinuation. "Playing coy, are we? Don't tell me this is about your company's mishap again." Without preamble, he shoved her into an empty private room and locked the door behind them. His voice was a venomous whisper now, dripping with menace. "Didn't your agent tell you? If you want to make amends, you'd better show some sincerity." Or, his grin widened into something more sinister as he leaned closer, his grubby hands reaching for her. "Maybe Miss Ron enjoys things a little rough?" The words jolted Xisha like an electric shock, the oppressive haze momentarily lifting as she felt his grotesque weight press her into the sofa. Fury and survival instinct surged. Her hand groped blindly until it closed around the cold edge of an ashtray. Summoning all her strength, she swung it down, aiming squarely for his head. The man sprawled on the floor, his face a grotesque mask of rage and humiliation. "You wretched woman! How dare you hit me? Acting all virtuous when you're just..." His words cut off into a snarl as he heaved himself toward her again, his bloated form lumbering forward, his intent as vile as his words. Xisha, her vision edged with red fury, acted before his next vile slur could finish. Her foot lashed out, striking his belly with a force that sent him crashing backward, a cacophony of flesh and rage as he hit the floor. He lay sprawled like a grotesque marionette, flailing. She stood over him, high heel pressed cruelly into the folds of his stomach, her expression a portrait of icy disdain. "You revolting pig," she spat, her voice laced with venom. "Did you really think you could pick today of all days to die at my hands? Pathetic." She kicked him again, twice, with a sharp, ruthless precision before stepping back, the fire of defiance momentarily dimmed by a wave of bitter realization. Stumbling toward the exit, she felt a swell of desolation wash over her, each step heavier with the weight of betrayal. Lu Ginin. This was his doing. A calculated punishment for her rebellion, a grim warning: misbehave, and you'll be fed to the wolves. Her foot wavered mid-step, her balance slipping as exhaustion and despair tangled in her limbs. She was careening toward the floor when a firm, steady hand caught her. The jolt of the save pulled her back from the brink, and her hazy vision sharpened just enough to see crimson fabric and a pair of intense, startled eyes. "Miss Ron?" the man asked, his voice tinged with something like awe. His grip tightened just slightly, keeping her upright as he stared at her disheveled form, lips parting in a mixture of shock and wonder. It seemed, to her dismay, that even at her lowest, she was someone's goddess. When his model girlfriend, Ron Xisha, almost fell victim to a scandal that could have destroyed her reputation, the aloof CEO known for ghosting people at the drop of a hat found himself backed into a corner. Not even 8 mouths could spin a defense strong enough for him now. After sulking in silence and giving her the cold shoulder for a day without a single call or message, he finally deigned to release her from the metaphorical's blocked list. Beside him, Shu Zun, a figure of prestige, dared to ask where she was, only to find himself locked out and silenced. Meanwhile, Lu Ginin, rushing back home after cramming 3 days of meetings into one, carried a storm cloud of fury in his expression. Little Miss Trouble was testing his boundaries, it seemed. His assistant had already sniffed out her whereabouts. Miss Ron was attending the victory party for the jewelry showcase. Lu Ginin ordered an immediate detour to the venue, unaware of the storm brewing at Jiangnan Hotel tonight. The scene was pure chaos. Police, reporters, and gawking onlookers crowded the entrance. A bloodied, unconscious man was being stretchered into an ambulance as a tall, imposing figure emerged from the building, carrying a delicate woman in his arms. The reporters swarmed like sharks to a feeding frenzy. "What's your relationship with Miss Ron? Did you assault the brand manager? What did he do to provoke you?" Shen Yuchuan ignored the barrage of questions. Gently, he placed the fragile figure into a car, his every move calculated and calm, as 2 rows of bodyguards held back the throng of reporters desperate for answers. A sleek black Rolls-Royce purred to a stop at the curb, the tinted back window lowering just enough to reveal Lu Ginin's sharp, scrutinizing gaze. His focus locked on the fragile figure in Shen Yuchuan's arms, and his jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to find a new ally so quickly. With a curt instruction, he ordered his driver to tail the car ahead. Meanwhile, Ron Xisha rolled her window down, letting the night breeze sweep over her face. It cleared her mind, sharpening her voice into its usual cool detachment as she murmured a soft thank you. Shen Yuchuan, however, had slipped back into his casual, devil-may-care demeanor. "Why so polite?" he quipped, a lopsided grin lighting his face. "Forget that you're my sister's best friend for a second, I'm your #1 fan. You think I'd just stand by after all this?" Xisha lifted her gaze, her expression unreadable. "How about I treat you to dinner another day? Or would you rather have a signed photo?" Her tone was so matter-of-fact it left no room for argument. Shen Yuchuan feigned a wounded look, dropping his teasing grin. "Must you be so ruthless, goddess? Kids make choices. I'll take both." She blinked, momentarily thrown off by his boldness, and then sighed, utterly speechless. "Fine. Another day, dinner with you and Shenman happy now?" But her composure wavered as the relaxation hit, courtesy of the drugged wine earlier. Her mind swam, a dizzy heaviness tugging at her. Shen Yuchuan noticed instantly, concern flickering across his features. "You okay?" Xisha shook her head faintly. "Just feel weak." His smile vanished, replaced by firm resolve. "Don't worry. Close your eyes and rest. I'm taking you to the hospital for a full checkup." The playfulness was gone, and in its place stood a steady protector, his every move now tinged with quiet urgency. Back in the hospital room, Xisha lay hooked up to and for, her muddled thoughts swirling with flashes of that vile smirk from the overweight man earlier. Her hand shot out wildly in her sleep, and a sharp scream tore from her lips. She bolted upright, gasping for fresh air, only to freeze when her gaze landed on a face more chilling than any nightmare. Lu Ginin. His expression flickered between stormy anger and icy indifference as he stared her down. Dazed for a moment, Xisha rasped, "Why are you here?" He let out a mirthless laugh, one corner of his mouth curling upward. "Who else would you rather see? Shen Yuchuan?" His words dripped with scorn. "That aimless playboy doesn't even have a proper role at Shen Corporation. If you think relying on him will get you anywhere, you're better off staying by my side." Her fury ignited at the memory of this man, this despicable man, who had sent her off to entertain clients, using underhanded tactics that had almost shattered her reputation and dignity. Rage surged through her, and before she could think, she raised her hand, intent on striking him. But Lu Ginin's reflexes were faster. His grip caught her wrist mid-swing, his tone sharp. "What kind of tantrum are you throwing now?" Xisha's eyes burned with loathing as she spat, "The only mistake I made was ever believing you. You and that revolting pig, scheming with the company, you think I don't know? Did you seriously think I wouldn't realize those reporters were planted? You wanted to ruin me, didn't you?" Her voice cracked under the weight of betrayal, but her anger held firm. This man wasn't just heartless, he was out for blood. Lu Ginin's hand trembled as he lifted her chin, his rage tightly leashed beneath a dangerously calm veneer. "You do well to know your limits," he growled, his voice a low warning. "Don't think for a second that I won't deal with you if you keep pushing." Xisha slapped his hand away, her scorn slicing through the air like a blade. "Your methods are downright repulsive, Lu Ginin," she sneered, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You've bullied me over, and all because I once liked you? I may have been blind before, but don't think for a second I'll stay blind forever. The night you threw me out of the South Lake Mansion? That's when we ended. Completely. So don't mistake my silence for tolerance." Her voice didn't waver, but the fire in her gaze only seemed to provoke him further. Lu Ginin's eyes narrowed, their dangerous gleam a chilling contrast to his measured tone. "I thought I taught you once, never burn bridges unless you're ready to fall. Misplay your hand, and you won't just lose, you'll shatter." Xisha laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and cutting. "Oh, spare me your god complex," she snapped, tugging his tie with mocking force. "I'm not here playing some game of push and pull with you. And I certainly don't have the energy to coddle your delusional ego. So go on. Destroy me already. What are you waiting for?" Her challenge left him momentarily stunned, her boldness unlike anything he'd expected. "Then what do you want from me?" he bit out, frustration flashing across his face. Xisha drew in a deep breath, her lips curving into a smile so poised, so heartbreakingly perfect, it cut deeper than any of her words. "What do I want?" she echoed sweetly, tilting her head as if pondering the answer. "I want you gone. Now. Far away. Out of my sight. Forever." The room crackled with tension. A moment later, the nurse chirped cheerily, letting Xisha know that her recovery was going well and she could leave the hospital whenever she was ready. Then she handed over a test report, chemical traces in her bloodstream, clear as day. Xisha blinked, caught off guard. Last night, Lu Ginin himself had marched into her hospital room. The audacity of that man! They'd fought like wildcats, parting on bitter terms, yet he hadn't bothered to suppress this little revelation? Did he really think she'd flinch instead of meeting him head-on? Feigning calm, she asked if anyone else had seen the report. The nurse hesitated, then admitted someone had tried to get their hands on it, but the male doctor on duty had intervened and sent them packing. The mention of the male doctor was like an electric shock, her scalp prickling with unease. Her hands fumbled, and the report slipped onto the bed. There it was, unmistakable, his signature, bold and unapologetic, confirming he knew everything that went down last night. And worse? The others likely did too. A memory surfaced, sharp and unforgiving. The last time she stormed out of her father's house, his face had been purple with rage, his voice shaking with fury. "If you ever crawl back to that scumbag, Xisha, you can forget you're my daughter. You hear me? The Ruan family will disown you." And he, the foster son her father had raised like blood, the one who treated her like his own sister, had begged her to reconsider, to lean into her medical talent instead of chasing a modeling career for some spineless man. Was she really about to throw away everything she'd built for a guy who wasn't worth a second glance? Her heart screamed the answer, but the question lingered like an unwelcome shadow. Looking back now, how could she have been so foolish? Tossing aside her family and education for a man who never loved her, only to end up being handed over to another by his own doing. The sudden ring of her phone shattered the spiral of regret. It was her best friend, Shen Man, practically shouting through the line. "Are you still at the hospital? Stay put. I'm coming to get you. You've gone viral again. Step outside, and the reporters will swarm you." Xisha's fragile hope crumbled. Her voice, barely above a whisper, murmured, "Viral again, huh?" Shen Man's exasperation cut through like a slap. "Girl, you better not tell me you've let that Starlight Entertainment crowd dupe you. Do you even know your own worth? You're the top model in the capital, don't tell me you're clueless about your own buzz." Ending the call in a rush, Xisha opened Weibo, her heart sinking as countless photos and videos from last night flooded her feed. Something felt off, though. Shen Yuchuan loses it for a beauty, backing the top model scandalous sponsor revealed. The headline screamed at her, but all she could think was, what sponsor? Her mind reeled. That sleazy fat man? She was the one who decked him. The real sponsor? Lu Ginin. So what did this have to do with Shen Yuchuan? But of course, models weren't idols. For someone like Xisha, branded as a love-struck fool, no matter how good her professional chops, even the slightest stir could turn into an avalanche of backlash, leaving her reputation in tatters. Xisha scrolled through the venomous comments, each one cutting deeper than the last. It wasn't just her they targeted, they dragged her family into it, the people who'd done nothing but love and protect her. She clenched her fists. None of this was supposed to happen. If she hadn't stubbornly chased after Lu Ginin like a moth to a flame, she'd be preparing for her doctoral exams now, not sinking in the muck of the entertainment industry. After a long moment, she crafted a careful post on Weibo, "I don't like Lu Ginin anymore." The words looked strange even to her. She added another, "My partnership with Starlight Entertainment ends here." The post landed in the heart of the storm, stirring it further. Marketing accounts latched onto it like sharks to blood, sending it viral in minutes. Soon, hashtags linking her breakup with Lu Ginin and her contract termination trended at the top. Her private messages lit up with pings, one after another. Fans asked if she needed legal aid to fight the company. She almost laughed out loud when had lawyers gotten so desperate for work. With an exasperated sigh, she silenced the flood of DMs, switched off her phone, and leaned back, shutting out the noise. At that moment, the Shen siblings barged into the room. Shen Yuchuan beamed as if he'd won the lottery. "How could I miss the chance to personally escort our goddess out of here?" he teased. Xisha's lips twitched. "Can you stop calling me that? It sounds weird." Shen Yuchuan immediately plastered on a grin, angling for charm. "Then I'll call you Xisha, like my sister does." Xisha didn't argue, taking her silence as agreement. Instead, she asked, "Did Lu Ginin give you a hard time yesterday?" Shen Yuchuan hesitated, weighing his words. Last night, just as he clung to his goddess at the hospital entrance, that dog of a man intercepted them. "Hand her over to me," he'd said brusquely. "Thanks for your trouble, young Master Shen." Unfazed, Shen Yuchuan had quipped back, "Oh, has Starlight Entertainment gone bankrupt? Didn't know your company's CEO needed to personally clean up messes." Lu Ginin's icy gaze had hardened into something sharper. "She's my girlfriend," he declared with biting precision. Shen Yuchuan had laughed then, the sound mocking. "Funny. Why didn't you claim her in front of the cameras earlier, Mr. Lu?" "Some timing." At that, Lu Ginin had snatched Xisha out of his grasp with a proprietary air that spoke volumes. "It'll be official soon enough," he'd said, tone resolute. "You're welcome to keep tabs if you're so curious." Shen Yuchuan, predictably reckless, continued to toe the line. "So, what's it going to be? Another cryptic essay like those artsy singer types, or a public accidental rendezvous with some B-list actor?" Lu Ginin's expression had darkened considerably. "Don't you have your own projects to worry about? Maybe focus on those instead of gossiping about other people's girlfriends." Shen Yuchuan merely smirked, clearly not planning to back down anytime soon. Shen Yuchuan watched that retreating figure with gritted teeth, seething at the audacity of that old man who had the nerve to use work as leverage. Just because he had a few more years under his belt, he thought he could steamroll him in business, always keeping him one step behind. Snapping out of his vengeful musings, Shen Yuchuan plastered on a roguish grin and quipped, "By the way, just heard from my sister that you and Lu Ginin broke up. Good riddance, I say. That scoundrel isn't worth a second chance, so don't even think about going back to him." Then, without missing a beat, he turned on the charm. "How about me instead? Solid credentials, decent looks, plus, wouldn't besties turned in-laws be a total win-win?" Both women gaped at him, utterly flabbergasted by the sheer nerve of this walking spectacle. If it weren't for the fact that upsetting their parents would cause more trouble than it was worth, Shen Man would have lunged to pummel her audacious brother into oblivion. A peacock strutting his feathers and brazenly proposing to turn her best friend into his wife, really? The sisters' synchrony was almost comedic as they shared matching looks of disdain. "Yeah, no thanks," they deadpanned in unison. Shen Yuchuan, unbothered as ever, flicked his sister on the forehead with a sharp thwack. "Quit being so salty, little ingrate. You'll end up sister-in-law-less at this rate, you know?" With that, he clutched his chest in mock heartbreak and made a dramatic exit, muttering something about filing discharge papers for his goddess. Meanwhile, Shen Man gently pinched her best friend's soft cheek, her voice full of sympathy. "Poor thing. I can't believe your crappy agency pulled something so shameless. Lucky for them, you learned a few self-defense moves from my mom, or that scumbag would have gotten away with it." "I've already wired the penalty fee in full," Shen Man declared, her tone clipped with annoyance. "But can you believe that garbage agency is still pulling dirty tricks to keep you locked down?" Her gaze was sharp, unwavering, but Ruan Xisha didn't miss the way her expression softened. "That's no small amount we're talking about. Be honest, where did you get the money? Don't tell me you saved it up. With the way you blow through cash, even if you had some savings, there's no way you could have pulled a few million together overnight." Shen Man's eyes darted away, guilt written all over her face. "I borrowed it from a friend," she muttered, a poor attempt at sounding casual. Ruan Xisha squinted, unconvinced. "Which friend is so generous?" Whoever it is, I should pay them a visit and thank them properly. And if you don't start talking, I'll march over to my company myself and make them refund every cent." Shenman felt the ground beneath her metaphorically crumble. Cornered and realizing she had no way out, she sighed and threw up her hands. "Fine, fine, I'll come clean. It was your brother, okay?" Xisha blinked, incredulous. "My brother?" "Yes, your brother," Shenman confirmed, exasperated. "Apparently, after he heard you'd broken up with that guy and moved out of his place, he thought it was ridiculous for you to be roughing it in a dorm. So, using my name as an excuse, he went ahead and bought you an apartment. I only came to the hospital today to find an excuse to drag you there." Xisha's jaw dropped, her mind spinning. 3 brothers flashed through her head like a slideshow on hyperspeed. "Wait, which brother?" she finally asked. Shenman's mouth twitched, her patience hanging by a thread. "Are you flexing about having 3 brothers right now? Are you seriously going to pretend Nanjin doesn't count as family?" Shenman shot back, her frustration bubbling over. "Sure, he's not your biological brother, but he was practically raised by your uncle like he was his own. And it's not just him, your family's been quietly looking out for you all these years, fixing things behind the scenes. I've just been their messenger, the one stepping in when they couldn't." Xisha froze, her mind reeling as Shenman's words sank in. A wave of guilt and warmth hit her all at once, the truth piercing through her stubborn pride. It was true, she'd walked away from everything for the sake of love, leaving behind her family's safety net. And yet, here they were, still holding her up from the shadows. Her lips trembled, and suddenly, the dam broke. She burst into tears, heaving sobs that seemed to pull the air out of the room. Shenman's chest tightened, guilt clawing at her insides. "I wasn't trying to hide it from you," Shenman confessed, her voice softening. "It's just your family gave so much, and I couldn't say no." Hearing this, Xisha cried even harder. "And honestly, I've made so many mistakes myself. I owe them, and I owe you." Shenman stepped forward, wrapping Xisha in a tight hug, her hand patting her back in a soothing rhythm. "Family is family," she murmured. "No matter what you've done, they'll always love you. So what if you fell for a jerk? Don't let it break you. We've got your back, always." The words hit Xisha like a tidal wave, and she broke down all over again, tears streaming freely as though they were endless. When Shen Yuchuan returned to the hospital room after finishing the discharge paperwork, he walked straight into a scene of sisterly sobbing, 2 women clinging to each other, crying their hearts out. He froze, unsure whether to stay or quietly retreat, utterly lost as to what melodrama these 2 were enacting this time. Meanwhile, at the Nanhu mansion, the assistant called to report that Miss Won had been discharged. Lu Ginin pinched the bridge of his nose, weariness settling into his features. "Have you found the hypnotherapist yet?" he asked. The assistant replied hesitantly, "The most renowned hypnotist internationally right now is Professor Li Yanxiu. He just returned from abroad and is preparing to establish a private hospital, but he's not taking patients yet." Lu Ginin's response left no room for negotiation. "Book a restaurant. Arrange to meet him for dinner tomorrow." He hung up and moved toward the bed, intending to rest. But when his gaze landed on the empty side of the mattress, he froze. For a moment, it felt like he could see her again, that endearing, clingy girl who'd once been his constant. "Can't sleep again?" she'd ask, shuffling closer. "Come here, let me massage your head." And he would relent, sinking into her care. She'd cradle his head in her lap, her hands weaving calm into his tense frame. Between her tender scolding, "Don't forget to drink the herbal tea I made for you, it'll help you sleep," and the sweet distraction of her touch, she was better than any bitter remedy. He'd cling to her for a little longer, until weariness finally pulled him under. And now, in her absence, all that remained was an ache sharp enough to cut through the quiet. The train of memory derailed abruptly, crashing against the sight of a bed starkly empty, no trace of the vivacious girl who haunted his thoughts. With a huff of exasperation, The proud, stoic CEO yanked a pillow closer and muttered to himself, "It's not like I can't sleep without her. Medicine works just fine." But the hollowness of the moment lingered. The next day, in a private room at an elegant, old-world restaurant, the renowned hypnotherapist Li Yanxiu arrived as promised. He studied Lu Ginin intently before posing his question: was his insomnia a recent problem, or something more long-standing? Just as Lu Ginin opened his mouth to answer, his gaze caught a figure beyond the door, a familiar silhouette, all charm and subtle chaos, hesitantly peeking into the corridor. His lips twitched upward in an involuntary smile. What was her plan now? Standing there, wide-eyed and disarming, was she finally here to admit she'd gone too far, to patch up the wreckage she'd left behind? His suspicion solidified the moment she brushed aside the curtain and stepped into the room. People always said an ideal ex should disappear as if they dropped off the face of the earth.